Hi, I'm Sam Edith.
And I'm Amy Nelson. Welcome to What's Her Story with Sam and Amy.
This is a show about the world's most remarkable women, their professional and personal journeys.
Together, we'll hear from gold medalists, best-selling authors, and leaders of the world's most iconic brands.
Listen every Thursday or join the conversation anytime on Instagram at What's Her Story Podcast.
Jess, you've done so many things. What is the part of your career that you're most proud of?
Wow, that's a hard one because all the things that I've gotten to be a part of, Amy, have come at very different parts of my life. So they're connected to certain kinds of memories or moments for me, right? So maybe there's two, I think, that really stand out because I've seen the impact largely in culture, right? So when I started talking about beauty and stereotypes in the media and the impact of that on the confidence and self-esteem of girls and women, I think one of the programs I'm obviously most proud of is helping to build the Dove Self-Esteem Project and the curriculum work that we've done now to over 82 million girls around the world. Like, Dove's become the largest distributor of free self-esteem content in the world. And so that changed me and shaped me because I got to see the power of the scale of the work, right? And, I was one person as a playwright and as an educator doing this work well before I ever fell into the brand space, and then with a partnership with a brand, and it's been on now for 17 years. So was not a one and done relationship. I'm still working with them this many years later, longer than my marriage. And so, I think that's a moment I'm really proud of because of the longevity and also, the ups and downs and the learnings that have happened in that relationship. And then I think the other thing that I'm most proud of too, and Sam and I have gone some beautiful rounds about this in conversation, is, changing Barbie's body and working with, companies like Mattel or Disney on changing the way we see Princess and the way we see Barbie because they were such lightning rods for conversation and culture. And rightfully so. There was a lot of not great representation in those brands for young people. And that was a harder relationship for me to enter into because I was questioning how much impact I could really have. And then I've seen some tremendous growth come from that, in changing the doll and changing the conversation, but most importantly, maybe changing the way kids see themselves in the work, which is always my goal. I work on behalf of the people consuming the messages. The partners that are brands are just that for me. They're partners, but my real client are other people.
Jess, talk to us about how you saw yourself as a kid.
Well, I think that's a big impetus as to why I do this work, Sam, because I loved media as a kid. I grew up in Miami, Florida in the 80s, so everything for me was, just to frame the moment was Miami Vice and blonde, bouncy beach babes. And, it was the 80s, so waterfall bangs were really in, and I had like this crazy Jew-fro that didn't do much, and I was like really struggling with my ethnic ambiguity and like how I showed up in culture. So as a little kid, I loved TV. I even loved commercials. I was obsessed with who got to be on TV and who made those decisions, like who got to tell those stories, because I've always been a storyteller as a kid. But I had a real rough intersection of loving the medium and then also being very well aware that like girls like me didn't show up in that medium, not in the magazines I read, not in the TV that I consumed, and I grew up at home with a mom who also very 80s, was on every diet, known to humankind, and had been also indoctrinated with her own, body image messaging. So I got that passed down to me as far as like an emphasis on thinness and beauty and assimilating to kind of popular culture views of beauty. And so I struggled quite a bit as a kid with reconciling this insane creativity and curiosity I had, and then trying to figure out how I could put it out in the world. And so much of being a girl in the world still is about being validated on your attractiveness and your appearance. And so, then it was just a lot harder because I didn't have any framework to know what was going on.
Who did you talk to about it then?
Time, you wrote about this time in your book, A Very Hungry Girl. Can you take those of our listeners who haven't read the book or weren't exposed to it? It was a very dark time for you, a lot of that era.
Yeah.
Can you share with us what it was really like? Because I'm sure also a lot of our listeners have children that are going through challenges now. what was that like for you? And then what eventually got you out of it?
Yeah. Well, I heard Amy, you'd ask, like, who had I been talking to about those things? And I think it plays into what, Sam, you just asked, which is, I really had a very close relationship with my mom growing up. But I think within that closeness, there was a lot of enmeshment around the things that she had struggled with as a young person and then as an adult, and hadn't done a lot of work on herself before, and as she was raising kids, just wasn't that generation that went to therapy, that really looked inward. So I absorbed a lot of that messaging. Like, I grew up in a family where we did group diets. My dad was on a diet. My mom was on a diet. We had a little chart, in our bathroom where people logged their weight publicly. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't, but it was so normalized for me. It was just what I thought you did. And I thought when you got into puberty, because this was the big message for me, right? I wasn't a kid who grew up with a weight problem. That's the irony of this. And that's maybe why I would say, Sam, I wrote that book first, was to kind of talk to both parents and kids and say what you may be innocently thinking is good advice for your daughters, if it's not examined on its own merit of health and wellness, like, can be very damaging. Because my mother didn't want me, she was overweight as a kid. I was not. But she didn't want me to go through what she did. So it was this preventative measure, right, from her to say, we're going to start you on a diet, when I started to develop hips and breasts and, like, started to put on a little bit of weight. But I look back at those pictures and I think, oh my God, I was just going through puberty. I wasn't like, and even if you do have an obese kid, or you've got a kid who carries extra weight on their frame, like, the manner of the conversation was never an affirming one about my body image and navigating my hunger and my puberty and my growth. It was all this very intense shame around being heavy, taking up space, wanting to be accepted and approved of on the outside world. So I think for me, I started, developing an eating disorder late middle school, high school for sure, that lasted, well into my 20s, and, was a result of a lot of this messaging, both at home and I think obviously out in the world. And it wasn't until college that I went into, like, recovery for it or treatment for it that I actually really had a framework of understanding how much I had absorbed from my mother's unmet needs and unmet pain around this issue. And it's really hard because for many years I wanted to just, blame. And I think we all go through this period where you have an awareness and you want to heap it on our parents. And I've been in therapy for quite some time. I've done a lot of healing around it, still have a lot more to do, but I get it more now that she was coming from a place that she could only come from. And that was, her own misinformation and pain as a kid in doing that. So I think that fueled for me why I want to work on the systemic change, not just broadly out in culture, but in how we engage in our families too.
That's amazing, and a lot. In relationship, it's really interesting how our relationships evolve with other people, and then also how they evolve with ourselves.
Yeah.
And so, like, what is your relationship to your body today?
Oh, we've gone on such a journey together, me and this beautiful body that is now in full-blown perimenopause, y'all. So here's the beautiful part of it is, like, I'm talking to you all about, like, my puberty days, which now are, like, so far in my rearview mirror. And I'm like, holy crap, nobody prepared me for, like, late 40s perimenopause and all of the shifts that are happening there. But I will say that I'm the healthiest I've been, both physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, that I've ever experienced in my journey in this earth so far. And that's come from a long fought, battle with, like, both the mental unwellness of an eating disorder and the long lasting effects of diet culture in this country and in this world. And also new things that get to pop up when you unpack something like an eating disorder. It's not just about what you're eating or not eating or obsessing about weight. It's a metaphor. It's a euphemism for so much more. And Sam and I have talked about this too. It's like women, we're not allowed to take up space. That's still very scary, still very damaging. And even though we've got lots of raw confidence messaging, which I'm highly aware of, at the end of the day, the world doesn't reward confident women. They just don't still. It's still a liability to be a confident woman, even though we tell our girls that's what we want them to be. The world is still not set up, I think, to fully accept and embrace the complexity of a woman who loves herself and who takes up space. And I think those are the things I now grapple with as I have age and wisdom under my belt is, reassigning my values, like learning to heal and let go, but also learning more what's really important to me, and taking up space and being seen is really important to me. But I had to do that for me first. When I was a kid, I did that with regard to like a physical facade. Like if you complimented me, then I felt seen on these very surface kind of symptoms. And now I'm interested in a different kind of relational piece. And all of that, I guess, goes back to the question about my body, because this is the suit of which I walk through the world in. And, and now I have a different relationship in caring for me, and as such caring for my body in different ways and for different reasons.
I'd love to step away from your journey for a second, because you do have such incredible advice for parents. How do you, Amy's a parent of 4 young girls, all under age 8. My 3 kids. How do you start from a very early age instilling a love of your body at any size?
Yeah. I think that comes from living your own healing at any stage of which you're at as a parent. If you haven't started looking at it yet, then let this conversation be the wake-up call for thinking about that. It doesn't mean you have to parent from a place of perfection. We know that that's impossible and unnecessary even in this conversation. But what I wished I would have had from my mother was transparency in her real journey about where she was at. My mother just hadn't done any exploration about the diet messaging and the abuse that she had put her body through, and was parenting from that place. And so I would say the biggest advice is, get conscious of your body beliefs and your body biases. If you propose to have at home this like body free talk where, you're not talking about weight with your kids, but you're in the car with them and you're talking about weight on the phone with your friend that they're overhearing, or you're commenting on a stranger passing by, like they pick up on all of it, not just the direct messaging. And so I would say it requires a real sense of awareness and grace, because I do talk to tons of moms every day who are like, want to be better for their kids. And I'm always like, be better for you. Your kids will pick up on what that means to do that. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's most important. So for me, it's about starting conversations, not having the perfect conversation about body image.
That's amazing. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And Sam, thank you for asking the question, because we talked to my girls about being strong and eating foods that make them big and strong, but I haven't gotten past it, and I haven't had to yet because the world hasn't impacted them yet, but I know it will. And I'm kind of dreading it. I'm just dreading it. Like stick my head in the sand, dreading it. But
yeah. Well, the thing is too, I've met lots of really evolved, aware, conscious, and intentional parents who are putting lots of conversations into the atmosphere, and then they get thrown, Amy, just like you said, like one day their really happy, strong, resilient kid comes home from a sleepover or comes home from an experience in school, and all of a sudden is like soul crushed that somebody commented on their appearance in some way, or, and the hard part is, as a parent, you think what you've said has fortified them to the space of resilience, but the truth is, like, somebody else's words will penetrate their confidence and will have them question it.
100%. And I think my own personal experience, I had a boy bully me from 1st through 3rd grade. He called me fatso, and it impacted me and my self-confidence for decades.
Right.
Decades.
Right.
And I want to ask a question around that, because we've spent a lot of time talking about bodies and confidence. Is it possible to go from insecure to super confident? Do you think that's something we can do?
Yeah. Yeah, but I do. But I also think those are not like stations for arrival. They're manners of traveling. I think everybody has moments of insecurity and moments of confidence. So I would encourage us to not think about them as stationary elements of being. Like right now, you might be in an insecure phase in your life, whether you're 12 or you're 42. Like insecurity is a natural human experience. And and doesn't have to stay. And I think, and confidence can also be a natural human experience, but doesn't always stay. So I love to talk about emotions as energy in motion. They move through your body, they move through your life. It's like they're not stationary, they're fluid and flexible. And I think if we could develop a emotional literacy around that, Amy, it would be helpful for us to recognize that these moments, they happen, they're real, we can feel them, we can experience them, and then we can move on from them. So we don't stay stuck in that label. So when you ask, can you move from insecure to confident? I mean, I could do that in one day. I could do that in one morning, like depending on the circumstance, you know? So I think it's important to know it's all within us. All of it is within us, and none of it is based on external things. We might think it is, right? We might think, well, I'll be confident when I have this or reach that or have this goal met. But we all know this. We know incredibly successful people that does not guarantee their happiness or confidence. So it's really an inside job.
Jess, you have basically been an entrepreneur throughout your entire career, starting in your 20s. And you've reinvented yourself and your direction many times, although all with the same thread. I think there's a very, very strong storyline through all of it. What have you learned about entrepreneurship, and what are your sort of thoughts on entrepreneurship today?
You know, I wish I had a community like the both of you when I was 21 and deciding to start a business without even knowing the term entrepreneur. I just knew I was a highly educated person who didn't like any of her job prospects. Like, I was a creator who had 3 degrees from university that guaranteed me literally to make no money because they were all liberal arts degrees that I loved. And there wasn't a career path forged that was like combining theater and women's studies and social issues. So I was like, how does one make this? And what I will say is the solo entrepreneur journey for me, which started at 21 and I'm now 48. So I've been doing this my entire career. I've never worked for anybody else except for a retail company I worked with for 4 days selling clothes, and then I had to leave that job. But that was my only experience, like 4 days. Well, and here's the story I don't often tell. That was at a company called Learner, and which was then owned by the Limited, and I was selling clothes, but I was a terrible floor person because I was in the dressing rooms talking to women who were having breakdowns about their bodies more than I was out on the floor. And while I was in a dressing room with a young girl and her mom during back to school shopping, somebody stole 4 leather coats off the floor when I wasn't looking. And so I think my career in retail was going to be limited no matter what, because my heart was in helping in a different way than selling. I mean, turns out they actually bought a lot of clothes after our confidence pep talk in the dressing room, but I was not destined to be a store manager in that way. But I left, and I think the thing I've learned the most about, I haven't actually told that story very much out loud. It's pretty funny. What I learned about entrepreneurship is that it's really lonely if you don't tap into community. And I know for me, obviously, because I was doing this in the, early 90s and didn't have, we didn't have the internet. I didn't have the connection to community. I didn't have a framework of entrepreneurship. And what I was actually doing was quite brave and awesome. I did it as a survival technique. I mean, I've always figured out how to make money doing what I love. I understood the relationship as finding my audience, figuring out how to, that transactional experience of what's the need. And so when I started as a nonprofit theater director, and I made up that company by getting a grant for $5,000 from a pharmaceutical company who had issued an arts grants program. And I applied, I got it, and then I started a company on $5,000 and had no idea that you should match it, that I needed to raise more money. I just started doing it and figuring it out as I went. So I think 3 big things would be, it can be really lonely, and sometimes it still is really lonely. I think, I'm captain of my own ship here. I have a really wonderful team, but as you said, Sam, I reinvent all the time, and that can feel so scary and inconsistent, and I'm always questioning, am I, a good leader? Am I supposed to be this way or that way? So there's a lot of loneliness there. But the other 2 things I'll say is there's incredible I love the excitement of the hunt of being an entrepreneur and on to innovating and creating and the freedom and flexibility to do that. And then the third piece I'll say is I'm a problem solver, and entrepreneurship lets me experience that. Like, I like to continue to explore ways to be part of the solution when I see something that's there. So it's a mixed bag, for me. Unfortunately, like, I don't think there's anything else I'm really designed to do, but even knowing that, it's still, it's an up and down journey, as you both well know.
It is an up and down journey. That's what I mean. Like, I think
that's like an understatement.
I know. It's so funny because, like, anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to try entrepreneurship, it's really hard to explain it. But, like, once you're in it, you're like, yes, oh yes, yes, not
Yeah.
said over and over again. And I don't think it's really anything you can prepare yourself for, because it's really just like, yeah.
I think I'm also happy that I did it, though. Even though I said I wish that there was this community, and I do, I also wonder if that would have been prohibitive for me, because I would have felt like I needed to do entrepreneurship the right way, air quotes. And I think now there's such a community built and such a buzzword around it, and such a, kind of model that people, think you have to emulate. I'm sort of glad I did it at a time, or started, exploring being an entrepreneur at a time when I really didn't know what that meant, because I was able to own it and do it without feeling like I had to, like, again, sort of assimilate to a particular style or way.
Well, I think that, though, leads to, like, another question, right? In terms of self-esteem and who we are and how we build our lives. Like, how do you build your life independent of expectations or the way other people do it? Or, like, how do you avoid falling into that trap over and over again?
That's a good question that I don't know if I've got as concise an answer as I do in some of the other questions you've asked, because I think I'm living that right now. As my company grows and has become more successful, I think whether or not it's about falling into thinking I need to do it in a certain way that people do it, for me it's more about what level of success and what kind of success am I really, like, looking to create. What does success look like for me? Because I can tell you, at a time in which my company was the most profitable, I was the most miserable personally, and having the deepest health crisis mentally, because I was building a business that looked great on the outside to other people and was shiny and had all the attributes that got the accolades, but it was not born from where this work is born from for me, which is relationships and problem solving and being creative. I had lost that. And so no amount of money, I've now discovered, is worth that kind of feeling. And now I've redesigned the company, and I'm at a space again where I am incredibly aligned and profitable and growing. And it's different because I grounded it in values that were important to me. And I did things that the old entrepreneur and boss in me would have never done. Like permanent half-day Fridays for us is just one example that happened, especially during the pandemic, where we were just like, we all needed 2.5-day weekends. It's minor, but it's major when you're a small team and you're at the beck and call of big clients. Like, choosing that was important, or putting mental health and wellness first and designing my business around what that meant for me and then therefore my employees. So those things now are my guideposts, and I think that's what helps me, Amy, stay more centered on my definition of success versus blindly sort of going out there and trying to emulate a model that's not mine. I have an IP business. I'm not selling gadgets and gadgets. Like, that's not my main connective point. And so in order to protect that IP, I had to protect the body, the life, and the world that IP lives in.
Jess, talk to us about your journey to romantic success.
That's my favorite thing to talk about. Well, Sam knows my amazing partner in life that I didn't marry until I was 40 years old. My husband's name is Felipe. And I met him in my late 30s. And so my journey to the romantic partnership of my life is such a great It's such a great journey because ultimately I would say to anybody listening, partner did not come in the package that I had thought my partnership would come in, as we hear all the time. And in some ways I feel quite like a cliche. I had been in love with other people. I'd been in long-term relationships, and I would always hear people tell stories about the moment they knew they were in love and like, boo, like, and I was like, well, I've loved people and I've been in love. And then I had that moment with my husband. We knew each other casually. I was actually engaged to somebody else for a very short period of time on the path to becoming a stepmom, and really discovered that I loved the kid more than I loved the guy. And so had to extricate myself from that, because that's not a fair scenario for anybody, and was of course heartbroken more for the girl than the person, and was in this space of real reclamation of myself. So I took a year off from dating and took a year to do all kinds of things. I took pole dancing classes and writing classes, and I was in a ladies rock band for a minute. Like, I did all the things that were like, my new renaissance of being. And I had known Felipe casually for a couple of years, and then we came back into contact together, and never thought about him in that capacity. My husband is a beautiful woodworker and artist, and he came over and made dinner, and I remember sitting at the table with him, and I had that love moment. I had that moment where he was talking, and I had all these feelings that were very unfamiliar to me, even as a 37-year-old woman who'd been in relationships before. I was like, oh my God, is this it? Is this what people are saying? And then fast forward, we eloped 6 months later. And it indeed was. And now we're going on 9 years of marriage, and it's incredible. And the thing I'll say too, my husband's from Mexico. English is his second language, and he married a professional communicator in this language. And there is nobody better who can speak to me, with me, and connect than my husband, even with the language differences that we have.
I love
amazing.
that. And he is so supportive, and your relationship is so strong. And I've seen you two in action. I think one of the things that, when you just said he didn't come in the package I expected, or he wasn't the package I was, can you elaborate on that? Because I think that so many of us get caught up in the package.
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, we have wildly different, backgrounds. So he, grew up in Mexico, had been in this country for about almost 18, 19 years by the time we met, worked in a completely different industry, had just had different life experiences. Like I think, if my socialized way of thinking about relationships would have had it, I wouldn't have been looking for somebody who we weren't in the same industry together. Like, I would have imagined that we would have had nothing in common, Sam. Like, what would we possibly get to connect on? And then what's interesting is, because I love people and I love talking to people, we've always maintained this. The first time I ever met him, we had this beautiful spiritual conversation about sage and energy and saging a room, and I'm definitely into all that, great woo-woo stuff. And he asked me questions about it, and we had this beautiful conversation. And I remembered that when we got reconnected again, that there was something that was just delightful to be curious about with him. Like, he just kept surprising me. And I remember, I will say one thing about my husband, although now the situation is different. I was already pretty successful in my business, and he was starting a new one, and we were financially not on the same level. And I remember calling, and talking to my dad about how I wanted to marry, and I was just so crazy about him. But I think I was feeling like, oh my God, should he have more money? Should I be is that a concern for me? And I remember my dad saying, this is life-changing. So shout out to Michael Weiner. But what he said was, a man's bank account is mutable and changeable, but his character is not. And, and he said, if he's a good person and a kind person and you love him and he's your partner, his bank account can change over time. But those other qualities are much harder to change or shift in a person. And what it did was give me perspective, and I think in some ways permission. And I don't mean that in super patriarchal sense, but I do mean it in a sense of social expectations, to kind of say, yeah, we're gonna enter this life together, and we're on so many levels compatible, but we're not compatible financially. And now we're much closer to that piece together, and his business has grown wildly. But it was I know a lot of people that would have been a deterrent. And I think it could have been for me had I not had a conversation with my dad about that.
I love that.
I think that's a weird dynamic. Sam, you and I have talked about that, especially in all your advocacy for women and financial equity and autonomy and relationships. I think that was a big piece that I still think about to this day. I think when you're a successful woman, especially in your like late 30s, 40s, and you've built a career and you've built a life, like, I think if you're a man in that capacity, like nobody really judges what partner you pick or how that sort of, but I think especially in straight relationships, but I think for like women, it's like, I felt like, oh my gosh, it's always been so forced down our throats that we need men to save us financially, provide for us in all of these ways. And my husband and I have very flipped gender roles at home. Like he is the maker, the baker, the cook, the cleaner, I am the finances and the negotiating of home stuff and like other things. And we work incredibly well like that. Nobody wants to see me cook and I don't want to see him do our bills. Like that is like, and that is also why I knew he was my partner, because we could design a life based on our strengths as people and not fall into those gender roles.
Mm-hmm. I hope we hear more and more stories like that, which I think is so important. It's just like, it's wild to me how gender roles have remained static in so many ways in America. And just, continue to.
Yeah.
Time for change.
Indeed.
Jess, talk to us about your decision not to have children.
I somehow knew this was going to come up in this convo. I was waiting for this one. Yeah. I also
rendered you speechless, Jess.
Well, I haven't been talking about it a lot publicly, but I'm at a place now where I really want to, and I want to have more of this conversation, especially for women of all ages, but also younger women who can know that these are options. So I've known for quite some time, I think, that like being a mom was not on my to-do list. There were lots of things that I dreamed and aspired to be, but I love kids. Obviously, I built a whole career talking about youth issues and caring about kids. And I think, for me, I got clear on that when I didn't marry the guy. I thought I'd make a great stepmom because I want to get in there and co-help and coach and love and support. But having that be a predominant identity for me was not of interest. And there's not a lot of places that you can talk about that without getting either a lot of judgment or a lot of grief or a lot of pressure. And so I think I just have avoided having that conversation. And when I met Felipe is 5 years younger than I am. And I knew, and, he came from a culture and a family that has a very big emphasis on children. And I remember saying to him on our first date that night where all the love bells went off for me, like part of those love bells was I said to him, I just want to tell you up front, like I'm interested in being a global parent. I want to have access of wealth and resource and love and energy to give to lots of kids. I don't want to raise my own. And I don't know how that sits for you. And I remember he said, like he kind of looked at me and was silent for a minute. And I was really scared that was a deal breaker for him. And he said, I never thought I would meet somebody who said that in the way you did. I feel the same way. I love my nieces and nephews, but I don't want to be a parent. I want to be giving back, but I want to live my life in a certain way. There's some healing I want to do. There's some things that I want to do. And so we've really anchored our relationship around that global parenting philosophy. We have a girls' school in Guatemala that we're deeply engaged with for Indigenous youth, and we give a lot of time and resource and energy there. We have 10 nieces and nephews who get to be doted on and spoiled like crazy. I get to show up and buy cupcakes and baked goods from your kids and love to support all these kids. Like that energy and resource for me has been such a beautiful part of my life, but has also had the shadow side of, your credibility as a woman, your place in this culture. And I think now we have more conversations around child-free and Auntie Supremes and all these sorts of phrases, But early days, I remember being like, oh, I definitely want to be more like Oprah than I do any of my, parents' friends with regards to her ability to have resource. And I remember Oprah very candidly saying there's no way she would be the Oprah we know if she had children of her own. And some of those gender roles around marriage and raising kids, like that sort of issue can be prohibitive. And so I love where I'm at now. It's been a huge journey to get there and to feel comfortable saying it without apologizing for it as a person. I mean, I think I even did that a little bit when I was like, and I love kids. Like somehow I've got to make sure people know that my choice to not have kids doesn't mean I don't like them. It just means I know for me, I am better suited to be a support system to kids broadly than I am to individually raising humans.
Well, I think you said it beautifully, and I also appreciate you sharing it, right? Because I think Amy and I ask the hard questions. We don't shy away from those. That's kind of the mark of our podcast. But I also think that it's a topic that most people skirt around. They're scared to talk about it. They're scared to ask. They're scared to discuss it. And I think the more we talk about it and make it normal to just speak about these decisions, the easier it'll be for other people to make that choice without apology.
Agreed.
Yeah. I mean,
It was
100%. You can't be what you don't see, right? And if you don't see the model of women choosing not to become mothers, right? Like in a great way with thought and positivity, then it's always like it's either like a failure or it's something you don't talk about or something you're not even allowed to think about choosing.
right.
It's
Well,
wild.
I went through this weird period right when I met Felipe because I was in my late 30s and all my friends were on me a bit about freezing my eggs. That was the time in which, everybody's like, freeze them, freeze them, freeze them. Like, and I remember that was my first big reckoning of being like, I don't know if I want to keep those eggs on ice. Like, is this really like what I am choosing? And it's really funny. And you talk about the being, if you can't see it, is I was in the car. So I have lots of chosen family. I have lots of kids who are in my life through various, means, like close with their parents. And there's one young girl who I call my niece her mom was a client of mine actually. And she died tragically of cancer right as I was getting to know her and really develop a friendship. And I spent the last 6 weeks of her life with her as she was passing away. And I became very close to her family and still am to this day. So I've been a part of the extended community to raise these kids with their dad and his now new wife. And so I was out with so now my niece is 16 and we were out shopping and, because that's a great thing aunties can do. I got expendable, disposable income to share. And this is the thing. She's a 16-year-old girl, very into financial independence. Sam, you would love her. She's like already got it mapped out what kind of life and career she needs in order to be her own autonomous person. And so we were driving and she said, I was thinking, Auntie Jess, that like, I don't want to be a mom. I want to be like you and Uncle Felipe. I want to be able to go spoil my friends and their kids, but I don't want to have somebody at home. And I said, why do you think that? Like, just tell me more about that. Like, where does that come from? And she goes, well, I want to have more money. I don't want to spend money on raising kids. I want to have more money, So we had this whole conversation just about those ideas. But I thought, how awesome for her to have somebody to at least explore that with versus where a lot of her friends were already, at 16 and 17, already planning their lives around that role, but maybe hadn't explored, is that what I really want? And what are the give and takes on that for women in culture? And, whether she keeps this decision or not, who knows? But I loved that I was able to at least be an example of a possibility of choice, to your point.
I love it. I love it. And we've had other amazing guests on, like Gloria Steinem,
Yep.
Suzanne Lerner, other women who've made the same choice and are still building and pivoting in their careers in their 70s and their 80s, right? And I think Gloria said to us, Sam, am I right? Like she doesn't believe she would have had the career she had if she'd
And
had
it
kids.
reminds me of Oprah
Yeah.
because Oprah always is kind of like the world mother, right? Like it's very similar ethos to
Yes.
yours, Jess. But
Yeah.
I also, that brought up a memory for me, which is that you almost became the next Oprah. Every time I'm around you, I still think you still could be. So talk to us about your journey with media. Now you have a podcast, and what has that been like? And tell us about your podcast.
Well, I love that. Sam has definitely been one of my earliest and most fervent champions, and for that I will ever be grateful. I mean, Sam and I got together in my mid to late 20s when I wrote my first book, and got to be on Oprah, which was obviously a dream come true. And and I wanted to be the love child of Oprah and Donahue, and in many ways I still do. I like being a provocateur of conversation and dialogue. I think a lot of things have happened over the course of my career. Technology and media has changed quite a bit from the days that I grew up watching Oprah and Donahue. Certainly the talk format has changed. So you're right. Podcasting is bringing me back to the closest degree that I can of a talk show, of a community of conversation. I would say outside of just having a podcast, one of the spaces I'm really excited about right now is combining all of my brand strategy work with podcasting. So I've been able to launch a couple of branded podcasts, one of them with Shonda Rhimes and Shonda Land that was connected to Dove and the work that we do on self-esteem there. We just launched the American Girl Podcast Network, which will be the first time a kids content company has their own network, and be able to bring that IP to life for girls. I'm really doubling down on finding that space, Sam and Amy, for us to have conversations brought to you by the scalability that I know brands can without it sounding like a commercial, which is a hard, it's a hard hill to climb creatively that way, because I don't know that people still think about it like that. But that's where I'm really interested in, and writing and producing stories now. As part of my work as a strategist, I review people's campaigns and scripts and movies and TV shows all the time. And I would be lying to say I don't still have the itch of how do I put my own work out there? How do I get back to developing my own voice? I've been behind the scenes for quite some time in some of the biggest campaigns, but I miss being in front of them. And it's scary because it's very easy to critique somebody else's work and help drive something strategically than to risk and put things out in the world on their own. But I'm at that intersection of taking that risk right now. So we developed a production company. We're producing, branded podcasts and shows that I think will be hopefully opening up conversations in the way that I first intended when I was that playwright trying to sell clothes at the mall and not finding that hit there. I think talking to people and using the technology that's available now is what I'm really excited about exploring.
Sam, should we go to the speed round?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Aim.
Jess, what book are you reading?
I just finished Molly Shannon's Hello, Molly autobiography, and it was fab.
That book. It was so good.
Did you love that book? I didn't know anything about her personally. Love her obviously as a performer, but her stories are beautiful. And the one thing, Sam, it's funny you actually said that because I thought about you. I think about Sam a lot when I'm reading books about women's lives because things pop up that she's taught me or we've talked about over the years. But what I loved about Molly in that book was, and I don't think I'm giving anything material away, but she just talked about an attitude and a philosophy of raising her kids and teaching them about how you respond to a situation is really everything. And she tells this great story of responding to something that could have gone one way very differently, and in turn kind of taught her kids about the adventure when things don't go your way and how that's actually more of an adventure than like a downturn. And I swear to you that has stuck with me. I think about it because I think it's not just a great parenting attribute, but for me it was just a great reminder of like the things that you don't think, the disappointments that you have don't have to be disappointments. They could be adventures on to the next. So love that book.
Yeah, I loved it too. Who is the client that you haven't worked with but you're dying to?
Ooh. We have some really good folks in the pipeline. That's a good question, Sam. I'm going to say I like the challenge of like a really historically male-dominated space. So I'm going to say auto, maybe. Like the car space, I think, is really interesting because cars are not typically designed for women or women's bodies. So I would love, that's a space to explore. I am getting into some cool health space and perimenopause space and menopause space, which I'm super jazzed about now that I'm living that life.
That's awesome. Kind of related to that, but who leaves you starstruck?
To be fair, I have met my idols, and with the exception of Oprah, who I think just gravitates and exists at a very interesting frequency. Like when you're around her, you feel excellence.
Mm-hmm.
I have met a lot of people that I admire, and none of them have left me starstruck once I get to see them as people.
Mm-hmm.
I would say maybe the closest has been Barack Obama. Like, like I think that kind of energy maybe I've been in a room where he is, and like I think that maybe was a time I was like a little bit of a gawker. And just like, was sort of watching and seeing that. But yeah, most people don't leave me starstruck anymore.
What's your morning routine?
So a big part of my mental health journey has been this health transformation that I've had in my life. I've gotten really more fit and connected to exercise as a way of self-preservation and well-being. So I work out almost every day, doing a couple of different things, but I'm a boxer and I love boxing. I've done kickboxing, but I'm really training in boxing, and I don't know that I'll ever go into a ring actively, but I do boxing a couple days a week, and that's incredible. So I do that at like really early in the morning. I wake up very early, probably like 4 or 5 a.m. That's when I get a little bit of my own meditation and regrouping time. I've got animals, so I take care of them. I love a good morning cup of coffee at 5, and then I'm working out, and then I go jump into the day.
Great. Well, Lou Burns has been listening to our conversation, and he comes in at the end of every episode with the male perspective. Lou.
Hi again, Jess.
Hi, Lou.
Hi. Thank you so much for being on our show. I really appreciate your advice and perspective on children. And it's a shocker that you don't want to be a parent. Yeah. So that leads into my question. How are you able to give such great advice on parenting when you are not a parent yourself?
I think that's a really good question to ask. I've spent 27 years listening to kids and parents and teachers and mentors and educators and social workers and everybody who touches the life of a kid. And I've worked in all of those capacities, even in clergy and in, synagogue programs, church programs, mosque programs. Like I have had an incredible career of being on the front lines with kids and their communities. And so I think what I'm really good at, Lou, is being that bridge between a parent and a child and being able to understand both the pressures of an adult raising that child, but have a translation for the kid and their needs and what they might be experiencing. So I think my intuitiveness, my empathy, my lifelong social science learning of this space doesn't allow me to speak from direct personal experience, but it allows me to speak from collective experience of 2.5 decades and more of lots of different scenarios, from the most traumatic to what I would consider the most healthy of dynamics. And I hold a lot of space for both of those conversations with young people and their communities. And so I think the world needs more of us to be those intermediaries and a respite for both kids and parents. And I love that part. So I think that love shines through too. And that's where I'm able to channel the advice.
I felt that. I felt that. You're the voice. You're the voice, basically, for the kids and for the parents.
I invite Jess over. She rarely says yes, but I invite her over all the time because I just want my kids to like rub against her. You know what I mean? Like she has the best energy, and she has endless number of lessons, and she's so wise and so relatable, and she has an it factor.
Yes. Now I want to get to know you more. I want to find out more about you and what you do.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Lou, if you want to ask any last question of Jess about your own parenting journey.
Okay, yes. Thank you so much.
I have to get off at 1. I'm so sorry.
That's no problem because we're done with the interviewing, so it's totally fine. No worries.
Perfect.
I can
you
stop
might want
recording
to use
and
this
then
one.
Lou can ask his own question.
No, let Lou ask. Let Lou ask it.
So my own personal journey, my daughter recently admitted that she struggles with her own confidence past her beauty. right? And I was literally left flabbergasted because for one, I'm a male, and I don't struggle with those things anymore.
Yep.
But I know that sometimes the application for a male is not always transferable to a female.
Yep.
So how should I navigate that?
How old is your daughter?
She'll be 14 in a few days.
Yeah, so she's right in the thick of it. She on social media?
No, I took that away.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Because of this issue.
Because of this issue. Okay. So one thing we might want to talk about is better understanding her relationship to the compare and despair that kids at that age have, especially from social media. I don't know if taking it away completely might solve that, because she's going to there's also then the reverse kind of FOMO of it all, where that's a lifeline for community for kids right now, whether we understand it or not as adults. Like, that is their currency of connection, especially during COVID. So just something to park and think about for a sec is just like, how might you be able to integrate it in a healthier way? But the thing that I would say is, regardless of social media, because that's only an effect of a bigger symptom, right? The bigger symptom is there's something inside of her that feels like she's not enough or not good enough, and I think what could be interesting is to explore for her, if you have not already, like what she thinks beautiful is, what are the attributes of people that she finds beautiful, and don't be afraid to get curious about that. If she says, well, I don't know, so-and-so at school is beautiful. Okay, tell me more about why. What is it? Tell me, is it, and then let it be less about you solving her problem and more about you exploring with her where her point of view is coming from, where her view of her, where her view of herself is stemming from. I just find sometimes girls talk in code at this age, right? They're emulating things that they've heard. They're repeating to you things that they feel, but they might not fully understand them themselves. So instead of reacting, which I know parents want to do because we want to fix and solve and heal and stop that, let the door open for the feeling to be there for her. And don't try to fix her, but try to understand that. And I know kids don't love to be asked a lot of questions, and I don't know your daughter, so it might need to take a couple of ways to get in there with her. But I do think that, I think one thing I would say is get curious about why she might feel this way versus taking it at face value. I think there might be more learning you could have about her by hearing why she's feeling and struggling with her appearance.
Wow, I got some great takeaways from that. What she thinks is beautiful,
Yeah.
attributes, and then stop trying to solve her and start exploring.
Yeah.
Her. Because
Yeah.
the reason why I took it away is because she was posting like racy videos and pictures of herself.
Yes. And that's a really important intersection, Lou, to say, what does she hope is the return from that? Because girls are looking for the attention, the validation, the assimilation to what they think is beautiful. I mean, a lot of the beauty standard has been you show your skin, you show your body, right? And rather than making her feel ashamed for those choices, let's affirm into why she thinks that's the way she has to show up in the world. And let's offer her some other ways, right? And that's why I feel like sometimes when we remove the tool, I know it solves the immediate issue, right? She can't post if she's not on there. But there's a social impact that can happen if she's not on there, that she feels more removed and more distant and may take on more risky behavior because of that. So I think maybe it's like kind of meeting in the middle to say, hey, talk to me about what do you think, what do you hope would happen when you post like that? Is it watching the likes go up? Is it getting the comments? Is there a person you want to get connected to that you think this is the way to do it? Again, I don't know your history of relationship. You might ask her these questions and she might be like, Dad, I'm not telling you this. And that's okay. Keep the conversation curious, not judgmental, not punitive, but curious, because girls, look, she's also 14 and there is natural exploration around her beauty, her identity, and her sexuality that parents don't want to think about, but it's normal and it's natural. And if we don't talk about it at home, then they talk about it with people who don't have their best interest at heart.
Wow. Okay, Sam. Where'd you find this woman again? I need you to come to my house too.
Like, yes, can you go to Lou's house, please? But next time I'm three-way calling. But Lou, this actually echoes a conversation you and I had about taking it away, which is
Yes.
the same thing I feel in my heart, which is it's just taking things away from a person who already feels less than, right, or already feels not comparable to her peers in some way, or she's lacking in some way, is
Yep.
just going to make her feel even worse about herself, not better, right? And I think it is a symptom, it's not a cause, as Jess said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Sam, me and Sam had a conversation. Me and Sam had a conversation about this, and she basically laid the foundation, and you just expounded upon it in a much in-depth way where it's not, now I'm seeing the fruits of that, of my taking it away. I'm seeing that. I guess one wouldn't be fruits; it would be consequences.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
of
and
taking away.
listen, it makes sense, Lou. You're protecting her. You want to protect her at all costs, and it seems like that vehicle is the cause, but it's not the cause. It's just the tool in which she's expressing something deeper. And I think that's where it's hard for parents right now, because it's such a lifeline, and a lot of parents don't understand social. Not speaking to you directly about that, but a lot of people just kind of want to demonize it. And I think Sam's right. Like, there's a connective tissue there that's important for kids, but teaching her how to be on it as herself could be very empowering for her. But there sounds like there needs to be some conversations that happen before, full things are restored. But I
Okay. Another
agree.
question then. What,
Yeah.
what kind of questions? Because I actually, now after having this conversation, I want to give it back to her, because it actually taught us a lot about her. You know?
Yeah. Oh,
And
I bet
when
it did.
It taught us a lot about her, and it scared me a little bit. That's why I took it away.
Of
And her
course,
mother
of
thought
course.
it was- So what
Well-
is a good what is a good way to reintroduce, and what questions should I ask her?
I would start with the reality, and Sam can definitely weigh in from a parent perspective, but here's what I would say. Why don't you be honest with her and say, my reaction to take the phone away was because what I saw scared me, and here's why. Because I actually, I love you, and I want you to respect your body and have a sense of safety when you're out in the world. And when I saw the way that those pictures showed up, it made me feel like you might be unsafe. I think kids can understand that from a parent perspective. I think we have to be careful not to body shame or body judge her, or like move it into a sexualized category where it's like puritanical versus the vixen, right? Like, you don't want that with her. You want to say like, yeah, you want to say like, I wanted to protect you. And that was my reaction. And then maybe say, have this conversation with my colleague and a guest, and I'm learning something, and I'd like to explore that with you. I'd like to find a way that you can have that ability to talk to your friends and be in the community, but protect yourself. Can we talk about that? And open it up that way, so that you're coming to her with your learning too, which I think could model for her that she could learn about herself.
She's been opening up to me so much more, but I still feel like she's missing something. It's weird. I never felt that way about anything. I literally feel like she's missing something.
Is she your
I
oldest?
think she's my only.
She's your only. Yeah,
She's my
of course.
only,
Of course
She
you
just moved
reacted
in
that
with Lou,
way.
Jess. Yeah, she was living with her mom, and she just moved in with Lou. So a lot of this is very new.
Okay. Yeah, then that conversation, Lou, would be even more important to say, hey, we're new. This is new. I saw this happen with you. I reacted in a particular way. And to be clear, I want us to have some conversations about this before we re-engage, but I'm open to re-engaging with you on having social. I want to just talk about what's going on in your heart, right? Like, I think the biggest thing is to reinforce for her what you see in her, what you value in her, and let it not be about her beauty. Please, like, let it not be about like, you're beautiful and I want you to preserve that. Like, the purity thing can be very tricky for girls, right? Especially with dads, if they feel like they've done something wrong in this way. I think to say, hey, again, I go to the safety piece because I think kids understand that. That's what their parents help them feel. They feel safe and anchored. And I think by having this conversation, you can help her see, oh, my dad is my safe place. My dad is where I go to have a difficult conversation because he's going to trust me to explore this. I'm not going to get punished for exploring it. And I think a lot of parents in their need to protect might shut down conversations that could be there.
Yeah, Sam has taught me a great tool, actually, to every time she tells me the truth, she can never get in trouble. And it's like
I love that.
Turn on the faucet.
Yes.
You know.
But what a beautiful boundary to understand that you're actually protected when you tell the truth, not punished.
Yeah.
I think if we had more attributes like that with parents, we'd have little less secrets. I mean, like the rebellious acts, the acting out is natural in adolescent growth and development. They have to do that to feel the boundary of where they sit in their world. But this is where I think you could stand up for her in a way as another person walking through life learning things instead of needing to be like the, all almighty dad who shuts it down and punishes. I'm over exaggerating, but you know what I mean? There tends to be a stereotype with men in raising girls that shut down the emotional connection. So the more emotional literacy you can model for her, the more she's going to start to look at that if she's interested in men. That will be the model she'll start to look for.
Okay.
So this has long-term consequence too, right? As far as her choices go.
Wow. Thank you for being alive. And for all the work you've done.
Yeah. You're welcome.
A copy of this audio, just this section.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
To study. Because me and Sam talked over the phone, and I was like, I wish I would have recorded her. But what I retained, I applied. And I got some great benefits from it. So,
well, listen, this is part of my ability to have bandwidth. You can get my information from Sam, and you can ping me, as you embark on that journey. And when I can, I'm happy to answer. So just, you can also reach out.
I appreciate that. Thank you for opening that door. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for listening to What's Her Story with Sam and Amy.
We would appreciate it if you'd leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, connect with us on social media at What's Her Story Podcast.
What's Her Story with Sam and Amy is powered by my company, The Riveter, at theriveter.co, and Sam's company, Park Place Payments, at parkplacepayments.com.
Thanks to our producer, Stacey Para, and our male perspective, Lou Burns.